Morena, good morning. Hello, I am Trina Cooper. I'm the General Manager for PADA, and thank you for making the time this morning to be part of our PADA pop-up chat today with Leigh Signal from the Sleep Wake Centre at Massey University, talking about sleep during the antenatal period. Just a reminder that this session is being recorded and it will be made available on the PADA website. Please note that your video image may be seen when we share the presentation on our website and social media, so please ensure that you have your camera turned off if you want to remain incognito. And we ask that you remain muted. And if you wish to ask a question, please use the chat function that you see at the bottom of your screen, and these will be addressed at the end of the presentation. An introduction for Leigh is at all times of life, including during pregnancy, sleep and circadian rhythm disturbances, are tightly linked to changes in mood and the onset, continuation and severity of mental illness. Leigh's research is focused on the relationship between sleep and mental health in pregnancy, and she's recently co-authored a book with her PhD study, Clare Ladyman, on sleep and strategies to improve sleep across this time frame. Leigh will discuss what's presently known about the relationship between sleep and mental health in pregnancy and share information from the book on helping women to get the best sleep that they can in each trimester of pregnancy. Leigh, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks so much, Trina, and morena, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be talking to you this morning. A really brief introduction about me. I am a sleep and circadian scientist, and so that's where my expertise lies. I just wanted to make it clear that I'm not a health professional, I'm not a clinician, so I don't work in that space. But I do spend a lot of time thinking about and reading about sleep and circadian health, and particularly how it's important during pregnancy and its relationship to mental health. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. And so these are the things that I'm going to cover. It's a reasonably high level chat. I'm planning on spending about 30 minutes talking and then have some time for questions. So thinking a little bit about why we should be talking about sleep, some information on the relationship between sleep and depressive symptoms and sleep and anxiety. I want to step you through some of the basics of sleep science. I think that's really fundamental to understanding why some of the strategies and tips that I'm going to give you might work. I'll talk specifically about sleep in the different trimesters of pregnancy, and then end with some ideas and tips for assisting women at that phase of life. So thinking about sleep, I mean, all of us understand many of these points here. Getting enough good quality sleep is linked to so many aspects of our everyday health and well-being. It helps us feel alert. It's fundamental in controlling our mood and behaviour and helping us feel motivated to do things. It allows us to communicate well with others. It's really important in helping us retain information. Your chance of remembering what I tell you today is going to be impacted by the sleep that you had last night and also the sleep you have tonight. It allows you to respond quickly to things happening around you, be coordinators, solve problems in a creative way, assess the risk associated with what's happening for you. And there's also lots of physical outcomes. This list is not exhaustive, but it is sleep is very clearly linked. Good sleep is very clearly linked to having a strong immune system and being metabolically healthy. So if that's not enough to convince you about the importance of sleep, I'm not sure I will be able to, but there are many, many good reasons why we need to understand the importance of sleep in our lives. So turning now to thinking about the relationship between sleep and depression. And I already mentioned the fact that there's a relationship between getting good sleep and having control of our mood. And that's certainly the case when we talk about sleep and depressive symptoms. We know that disturbances to sleep often precede the first depressive episode a person has, or a relapse in depression. And we know that people who are experiencing depressive symptoms also experience disturbances to their sleep. And that can either be through having difficulty falling asleep and staying asleep, or at the other end of the continuum. Sometimes sleep can be very prolonged in people who are experiencing depression. And if we replace depression with anxiety, we also see a similar sort of relationship. People who experience anxiety often ruminate about their worries in bed at night, which can create difficulties falling asleep. That can lead to further distress about their sleep, which exacerbates their anxiety. And it's also certainly people who have anxiety can wake during the night and experience anxiety symptoms and find it difficult to return to sleep. We also know that if you don't get enough sleep, that can create difficulties with your mood, which can then lead to further anxiety symptoms. So there's these cycles of anxiety or depression being linked to disturbances with sleep, which then leads back to those symptoms of depression and anxiety. So this vicious cycle where sleep and depression or anxiety are closely intertwined. And that stacks up both for non-pregnant populations and in pregnancy. The added challenge that we face in pregnancy is that sleep is, for many women, disturbed. And there's also a greater likelihood of anxiety, and for some women also a greater prevalence of depressive symptoms. So, and the other thing to realise that in pregnancy, the risk of entering that cycle may be greater. What we see is that it's certainly the case when we talk about subjectively reported sleep, but the relationship is not quite as tight in pregnancy when we objectively measure sleep. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about what happens in sleep. I think this is really important to understanding what we can do to help other people with their sleep. And I'm just going to touch on some of the key points of sleep science. So sleep is broken down into two broad categories, non-REM or non-rapid eye movement sleep, and REM, rapid eye movement sleep. And we often think about REM sleep as when our brain is quiet. So if I measured the electrical activity of the brain, it would slow, and your body is quiet. You're relaxed, your heart rate slows, your breathing slows, and so it's a quiet brain and a quiet body. Now, in direct contrast to that, REM sleep is a very busy brain. If again I measured the electrical activity of your brain during REM sleep, it would look really similar to what it looked like during wakefulness. And that is also the stage of sleep where if I woke you from it, you would probably be able to tell me something about some vivid dreams that you were having. So we link REM sleep to dreaming. And importantly, evolutionarily, we have evolved so that we don't act out our dreams. And so our major muscles are effectively paralyzed during dreaming sleep. So we have these two very distinct stages of sleep. Very quiet brain and a quiet body, and then a very busy brain and a effectively paralyzed body. And we step through the night through those different stages. We also can break non-REM sleep down into two further categories. We talk about light sleep, sometimes also called stage 1 and 2 non-REM sleep. And if I woke you, or I could much more easily wake you from light sleep than I could, so for example, from deep sleep. So that's where the names come from, light and deep sleep. And we also often call deep sleep slow wave sleep. So light sleep and deep sleep are the two types of non-REM sleep, and then we've got separately from that REM sleep. So let's have a look at how they all go together across the course of a night. So this is a stylized picture of what sleep looks like in a average healthy adult across the night. And what you can see is that on the left-hand side, we have where we start wakefulness, and we've got the stages of sleep down the side there. And then across the bottom of the graph, we've got the time of the night. So tonight, when you go to bed, you will enter sleep most likely through non-REM light sleep, stage 1 or 2. And after about 10 to 15 minutes, your brain will enter its first cycle of deep or slow wave sleep for the night. And it's probably going to spend a total of about 45 to 60 minutes in slow wave sleep before it bumps up into the lighter stages of sleep, and you're going to have your first dreaming period of the night. I should have clicked through. So that we firstly have that non-REM sleep, then we enter into deep sleep, and then we experience our first episode of dreaming sleep in the night. So we have these beautiful cycles of sleep that we work through throughout the night. What you can see from the image that I've given you is that most of our deep sleep happens in the early part of the night, and the amount of deep sleep we have reduces progressively as the night progresses, but the amount of dreaming sleep that we have increases. And so they are controlled by different things, and that's why we have different proportions of them. But it seems our brains require most urgently to get deep sleep when we in the first part of the night. And then REM sleep is controlled by different aspects of our physiology. What's really important to understand here is that no one stage or cycle of sleep is more important than the other. They are all important in terms of having a good night of sleep or good quality sleep. It's also really normal to wake, and I have not shown these in this stylized graph. It's also normal to wake 1 or 2 times per night, and to have periods of awakening that you recall and mostly do not recall as your sleep progresses. I also wanted to talk briefly about some of the things that control sleep, because I think they help us understand why we can sleep when we can and why it may be difficult to obtain sleep at certain times of the day. So there's 2 main things that drive sleep. The first is an internal mechanism. It's like an internal need for sleep. And as you can see from the image here, if I started this morning having a great night of sleep and fully recovered, my drive for sleep would increase across the waking day. And then tonight, hopefully I'm going to have a great night's sleep. And then that sleep tonight is going to help me get rid of that internal drive for sleep. If I stayed awake for longer than usual, that internal drive for sleep is just going to keep building and building across the period of wakefulness. And if I didn't have a great night's sleep or didn't get enough sleep, I might not fully recover back to zero. And it appears that deep sleep, or that slow wave sleep that I previously talked about, is most important in helping us reduce the brain's internal drive or need for sleep. Now, in conjunction with that internal drive, we also have a circadian body clock that's really important in helping us determine when we should be sleeping and helping driving sleep in the 24-hour day. Now, there are clocks in all the cells throughout our body, but there is a master clock or a master pacemaker that sits deep in the brain. And it is really important in controlling or providing information to many systems right throughout our body, and creating 24-hour patterns in the functioning of many of those systems. So we have variations in our blood pressure and our heart rate and the production of hormones and our functioning across a 24-hour period. And that's designed to help us be functional and awake during the day and to sleep well at night. So our pattern of sleep and wakefulness is also very carefully driven by the circadian body clock. And it receives information from lots of different sources. The clock's not perfect at keeping in step with the 24-hour day-night cycle. So when we eat, when we exercise, and when we interact with other people and go to work and do other social activities, all that information is fed into our clock to give us information about the time of the day. But the most important and critical information it receives is light. And so light is the key piece of information the clock uses to keep it nicely in step with the 24-hour day-night cycle. If I took you away from all those cues, that clock would drift slightly and become slightly longer than 24 hours. But the clock's also great. It helps us adapt when we travel to other parts of the world. I'm not doing so much right now, but hopefully we will do again in the future. But in terms of traveling to another location, receiving light information from the new location that you've moved to helps the clock adjust to the new day-night cycle in that new location. So that internal drive for sleep, coupled with this clock, helps determine when it is easiest for us to fall asleep and stay asleep, and also creates times during the day when it's not so easy to fall asleep and stay asleep. So what you'll see on the screen now is a yellow line that's really telling us how strong the drive from the clock is in terms of helping us stay awake and alert. So up is more alert and down is less. And what you can see along the bottom is the time of the day. So right now, we're feeling pretty awake and alert, and we have a little dip, many of us might be familiar with this, in the middle of the afternoon, where our drive for alertness decreases, and it might be a time when people find it easier to nap, and I'll come back to that. And remember, throughout the course of the day, that brain's internal drive for sleep is increasing. But the signal from the clock also counters that, particularly in the early hours of the evening. So we have actually a really strong drive from the clock for wakefulness a few hours before our normal bedtime, which makes it really difficult to fall asleep and stay asleep earlier than usual. I don't know if you've ever experienced this. We've had to get up really early for an event or to catch a flight, and you've thought, well, I'm going to try and go to bed really early and to get enough sleep. And what you find is that you go to bed earlier, but what you do is you stare at the ceiling until your usual bedtime. And that's because of your the clock's signal from your brain telling you it's not quite bedtime. It's trying to override that other pressure for sleep. Then the circadian clock signal drops off, and in conjunction with that brain's internal drive or need for sleep, that kicks in, and we hopefully fall asleep. And then, whoops, go back. Nope, not that way. And throughout the night, that helps us sustain consolidated sleep. So the brain's internal drive for sleep drops away, and it's at its very lowest in the early hours of the morning. So that's where we have least drive for wakefulness and the most drive for sleep. If you've ever been up right throughout the night, and you'll find that it's often hardest to remain awake in those early hours of the morning. And then as we get towards 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, we start to feel a little better. And that's because the body clock signal is now telling us it's time to start to think about being awake. And that clock signal creates another time of the day where it can be actually quite difficult to fall asleep or stay asleep, and that's around late morning. And if any of you who have worked at night and then tried to go home and sleep, what you might find is this is a really difficult time of the day to sleep through. So we find that night workers don't tend to get as much sleep as people who are working during the day and sleeping normally at night. So how much sleep do we need then? And it varies across the lifespan. And there's currently no evidence that says that the amount of sleep we need in pregnancy is different from the amount of sleep we need when we're not pregnant. And you can see that for the average adult, the dark blue section tells us that most people need about 7 to 9 hours per night to feel fully rested and be functional and maintain their health and well-being. There certainly are some people who might need less than that, about 6 hours, and some people who might need a bit more than that, up to 10. But we know that for the very large majority of people, they sit within those windows, and if we are getting less than 6 or more than 10, then there are health consequences and well-being consequences associated with that. So most of us sit in that 7 to 9, but a few of us might sit slightly outside that. Also want to make the point that it's not just about how much sleep we get. It's also about how we feel about the quality of our sleep, our satisfaction with it. It's about the sleep being consolidated. So I've already talked about that structure, or those cycles of sleep we progress throughout the night, and that wakenings are normal, but we don't want to have too many of them, and for the sleep to be quite fragmented, because that reduces its effectiveness. It's also really important to think about the timing of sleep, and having sleep that occurs at night is certainly most ideal, and trying to keep sleep times quite stable, going to bed about the same time and getting up about the same time each night is really important for good quality sleep. And also how sleepy we feel during the day also is important in terms of helping us understand what's happening with sleep. Okay, I'm going to step through now some things about what happens to sleep during pregnancy. And I'll do it in a trimester by trimester way, because that's certainly how it's been studied, and we certainly do see differences occurring as pregnancy progresses. Now, the evidence, particularly in early pregnancy, is actually quite limited, and there aren't great studies that have tracked people from prior to pregnancy right throughout pregnancy. So a lot of the time what we're doing is cross-sectional stuff, studying people at particular points in time, rather than really trying to understand how things change over time. But what we do know is that in the first trimester, one of the key issues that many women report is increased daytime sleepiness. It's often something they experience even before they know they're pregnant. And sleep at night can be disturbed due to nausea, actual vomiting, or needing to go to the bathroom multiple times. And that's all those amazing hormones that are kicking in, creating those issues and starting to lead to disturbance at night. Women might begin to need to nap during the day, and I'll come back to that. And what we know is the amount of sleep that women get in that first part of pregnancy is not a great deal more normally than they would be getting prior to pregnancy. On average, about 30 minutes more. But it seems there might be more people getting short amounts of sleep and more people getting more sleep. And as we've talked about, if we measure sleep using special equipment, what we see certainly is more awakenings, less time spent asleep, and actually getting less of that deep sleep in early trimester, first trimester. In the second trimester, I'm sure many of you know, many things improve. It seems to be a bit of a breathing space. And so people don't necessarily feel quite as sleepy, and they might feel that their sleep quality is improved. But particularly towards the end of the second trimester, some things start kicking in. Often there's reports of snoring, largely due to the nasal congestion that starts to occur. Women might start to experience heartburn or reflux. They can report pain, leg pain and cramping. And some restless legs becomes much more frequently reported. So I don't know if any of you have experienced restless legs. I had it when I was pregnant with my children. And it's a sensation within your legs, often a crawling or uncomfortable sensation that can only be relieved through movement. And so it makes often falling asleep quite difficult. And obviously in the second trimester, movement of the baby can begin to create disturbances for sleep. And the third trimester, well, it's all on at that point in time, and it's no great surprise that sleep might be disturbed for multiple reasons. Now it's not so much due to the hormonal impact, but the size of the baby and the discomfort that's being experienced. So again, lots of trips to the bathroom, maybe difficulty finding a comfortable position in which to sleep. Certainly snoring becomes much more prevalent due to that nasal congestion and also the pressure of the fetus, and that also causes the shortness of breath. Some women may experience something called obstructive sleep apnea, where they have episodes where their breathing pauses during sleep, and I'm going to come back and talk about that later on. And they might experience, again, leg cramps and restless legs, and anxiety and worry, if it hasn't already ramped up, might be at its greatest for some women in the third trimester. So when we measure sleep using our special equipment, we find the actual efficiency has decreased. The women are spending more time awake, and the total amount of sleep obtained in that third trimester decreases slightly. But I want to put a caveat around all of this. And for any of you working with women or working in the healthcare sector, you'll understand that there's just enormous variability. And so some people will experience quite small changes in their sleep, and other people enormous changes. And then the changes one person experiences can be so incredibly different from one person to the other. So I think the one thing to take away from this is the enormous variability that occurs for women in their sleep throughout pregnancy. I'm going to talk now briefly about what we can do to help women at this time. And I think the best approach to this is thinking about a toolbox of strategies. Because of the enormous variability and the differences from one woman to another in terms of both what they're experiencing, then the strategies that they're going to need are also going to be quite diverse and quite different. And what works for one woman for one issue may not work for another woman for exactly the same issue. So we need to have lots of ideas and strategies behind us. I think overall, when we're thinking about sleep at this time frame, there needs to be the normalization of change. It's okay that your sleep is different in pregnancy. And it's normal for it not to be great on every single night. You're doing amazing things with your body when you're pregnant. There's huge physiological changes occurring. So it's not surprising that sleep might be slightly impacted. And I think some of the things that I've heard and I like talking about is that we need to think about helping women create the opportunity and the right environment for sleep. So are they providing themselves with enough opportunity, and have they got a good place and space in which to sleep? But then to help them be open and flexible about the sleep that comes along. It doesn't have to be perfect every single night. And yeah, it's normal for it not to be, and for there to be really rough nights and then some better nights. And creating the opportunity for sleep really requires us to make it a bit more important in our priority list. And I think in our society, we have this overarching culture of, you know, sleep is for the weak. Sleep is for those who don't get enough done. You know, if you just, to fit more into your life, you just cut back a bit on sleep. And, you know, we do everything in our world to try and counter that, that opinion. But I think it's, and when, particularly in pregnancy, it's about saying, hey, this is the time to cut yourself some slack and to really think about where sleep is in your priority list. And women are really interested in sleep. They're really interested in prioritizing it. We don't want to turn it into something that they have to think they have to do perfectly for the health of their baby, but just something that they move up their priority list and they're willing to spend, make an effort to create more time for it. And I've already talked about the fact that, you know, sleep is going to be different for everyone, so the strategies that we're going to need will range widely. And a lot of them, they're not rocket science. They are common sense, simple ideas. I think, and I will give you some information at the end, there is a lot of not great information out there, so there's some really good places to go to get good quality information. And there's some dodgy information out there that we should avoid. But most of the good information, you know, it's based on science, but it's not crazy out there things that you need to do. So for example, thinking about the environment in which people are sleeping, you know, creating a safe sleep space. As I've already mentioned, you know, light's really important to our clock. It's also really alerting. So your safe sleep space should be dark. You know, good curtains, turning out lights, turning off technology. I'm not focusing much here on technology because there's not a lot of time, but, you know, reducing technology in the bedroom and reducing light exposure in the evening. But making your sleep zone dark. And if you can't do that with curtains, then things like eye shades are a great idea. They might feel a little weird to begin with, but after a few nights, most people feel reasonably comfortable with them. The same thing when we're thinking about noise. How do we make our bedrooms quiet? You know, turning off technology. You know, can you wear earplugs? And again, a lot of people find them a little uncomfortable to begin with, but after a few nights can actually find them quite helpful. Temperature is also really important, particularly in pregnancy when people can often feel quite warm, quite hot. And so being able to change your temperature, have layers on your bed so that you can remove layers and just sleep with a sheet, but have something to put back over if you get cooler. And comfort. Can't underestimate comfort. So using pillows and support and thinking about what's going to make your sleep environment comfortable. And I'll come back to that again throughout the next few slides. So I've broken the strategies, like the changes in sleep, down into trimesters, just to think about things that we can talk with women about at the different stages of pregnancy. My overarching opinion is that understanding sleep really helps. Understanding some of those basic things about what's happening when you sleep really helps women understand what they can do to support their own sleep. We talked about nausea and getting up during the night being two of the key things that really impact sleep during the first trimester. So all the usual things that are recommended for nausea, small regular meals, bland foods, keeping up the fluid intake, but also thinking about having snacks by the bed. So if you wake up in the night and feel a bit sick, that might help. Or when you wake up in the morning and feel a bit sick, having something bland that you can get into your tummy. Getting up during the night is really normal in that first trimester of pregnancy. And I think people are reluctant to say anything about reducing fluid intake, but perhaps for women who are really struggling with that, trying to do so in the hour or two before bed. And because light's so alerting, the last thing we want to do is flick on all the lights when we have to get up to go to the bathroom. So trying to have a night light in the bathroom can be a really effective strategy. And reducing caffeine intake to help with the onset of sleep, certainly in the second half of the day. And caffeine has a really long half-life. It stays in our system for quite a long period of time. So we need to cut back on it quite a long time before we're thinking about going to bed. We all have individual sensitivity to caffeine, some more and some less. But even for people who don't think they're particularly sensitive to caffeine, having it late in the day can make your sleep lighter. Back pain is something that's often reported disturbing sleep in that first trimester. So gentle exercise, things like heat packs, but also thinking about support pillows behind your back or wherever you need them to help you get comfortable while sleeping. I think pets is a tricky one. So in the first trimester, what we're trying to do is think about, sleep might be starting to be disturbed, and trying to remove things that are creating extra disturbance. And for some people that might be pets, cats that get up in the night. But pets can also be a comfort. So I think people have to do what works best for them in their space, in their world. Women often report more frequent and vivid dreams, and sometimes frightening ones as pregnancy progresses. They are really normal. It's not really clear why that might be the case, whether the increased awakenings just means you're more likely to wake from that dreaming sleep. But talking to someone about them is probably the best strategy for helping to deal with those initially. Now, when I'm talking about these strategies across trimesters, many being all trimesters, but I've tried to focus on ones that might be key in each trimester. So we talked about nasal congestion being something that starts often for many women in the second trimester. So doing things like raising your head while you're sleeping can be helpful, using nasal rinses. And again, reflux can be something that kicks in at this stage. So all the usual things, smaller meals, especially not eating large amounts in the evening, avoiding certain foods, avoiding caffeine, sleeping on the side so the tummy is lower than the esophagus, and again, elevating your head. I briefly talked about restless legs earlier, and it is something that the prevalence of it increases about threefold during pregnancy. And there's no proven quick fix for this. There's some limited evidence for iron and folate, but not strong evidence. And there's some limited evidence for trying to reduce caffeine consumption. But it certainly can be distressing for women. And if it becomes very distressing, it is something they should talk to their GP about. Leg cramps, again, something that happens more commonly in the second trimester. So that's often people need to get up flex their foot, walk around. But supplements should be something that for that reason should be discussed with your GP. One thing that also crops up in relation to sleep, and it's not so much about helping women get better sleep, but it's about decreasing the risk of stillbirth with sleep position. And so the recommendation is that from 28 weeks of pregnancy, women should be sleeping on their side. And often the most comfortable position is with their knees bent and using pillows to support them. I think there's a lot of anxiety for women around this. And so we talk about encouraging to sleep on your side. And if you wake up during the night on your back, just shifting back onto your side. Although there certainly is evidence showing an increased risk between back sleeping and stillbirth, there's still a lot to be understood about this in terms of the length of time and the factors that are influencing that relationship. So I just think it's important to encourage women to think about sleeping on their side wherever possible. So in the last trimester, what can we do? Well, there's lots happening. I certainly think right throughout pregnancy, napping's a great idea for all of us, whether we're pregnant or not. Napping's a good idea. If we're feeling excessively sleepy during the day, if we're struggling. And so we talked earlier about the timing of those naps. And so when that circadian clock has reduced its alerting signal slightly in the middle of the afternoon, that's a good time to try. But if you're working around other things and you're sleepy and you think you can fall asleep, then any time of the day is fine. We also talk about trying to limit them so they're not longer than about 45 minutes. And we're doing that because we don't want people staying too long in deep sleep or waking from deep sleep, because that can make you feel quite groggy and disoriented when you wake up, not a pleasant feeling. So if you give yourself about 45 minutes for a nap, you'll probably get about 30 minutes of sleep within that. And hopefully most of it will be that lighter non-REM sleep and not a lot of deep sleep. So you should feel better when you wake up. The one important thing to remember about napping is that if women are napping but then having difficulties falling asleep at night, they should perhaps stop napping for a couple of days and or reduce the length of their nap, or try and make sure the nap occurs slightly earlier in the day. So what we don't want to do is to have people falling asleep for long periods of time during the day and then really struggling to get to sleep at night. Babies' movements and Braxton Hicks become much more common in the third trimester. And, you know, I think we should embrace these as the baby movement as you know, a sign of a healthy pregnancy, but they can be disconcerting. There's not a lot that can be done other than moving position. And the same with Braxton Hicks, along with trying to keep up fluid intake. Now, I haven't talked a lot about insomnia, because I think it's a whole another conversation for another day. But difficulty falling and staying asleep is really common throughout pregnancy. Certainly, and in relation to anxiety in pregnancy. So it's not unusual, but for some women, it can become problematic and very distressing. For people who are having milder issues with falling asleep or staying asleep, then gentle activity, using relaxation strategies, mindfulness, trying to write down their thoughts at night, if they wake up during the night or while they're in bed in the evening, talking to others about their fear or worries. What we recommend is that if you're lying in bed and you can't sleep after about 30 minutes, then you should get out of bed. We don't want people lying in bed feeling stressed about their sleep. So go to another location that's quiet and warm, without bright light, leave your phone behind, and do a quiet activity. Read a book, do some knitting, and then go back to bed when you feel sleepy. if it becomes a problem for women that is prolonged over multiple nights and it's interfering with their daytime functioning, then they need to talk to someone else about treatment. Talk to your GP and or seek out a psychologist with specialist sleep training. Like I said, that's a whole nother topic that could be unpacked on another day. I also wanted to mention snoring and breathing pauses again, because I think that it is important that women talk to their GP if their bed partner tells them that they are regularly having pauses in breathing during the night. In New Zealand, we don't have great, we have really long waiting lists for treatment for respiratory sleep disorders, but I do think it is important that women raise that with their GPs. So just to finish, I wanted to point you to some more information. As my PhD student has written, and that's got lots of good information about sleep and pregnancy. There are some great websites, the Australasian Sleep Health Foundation with fact sheets. There's a US-based one, sleepfoundation.org, that has some fantastic information on it as well. And there's also some really cool podcasts out there. Sleep Talk is one of those that I would highly recommend, that was recommended to me by someone just recently. They've got one specifically on sleep and pregnancy, which is really neat. So that's it from me. Sorry, there was a lot of information fired at you there in a very short space of time, but I'd be happy to take a few questions from anybody.
Excellent, thanks Leigh. Really, really informative, really good. Question from Louise is there any evidence for magnesium for cramps or restless legs? I keep being told this, but have found no evidence for it.
Yes, I think it's one of those things where there's lots of anecdotes, but I don't know of good science supporting the use of magnesium for those things. And so therefore, I think it's something that should be, if there's no downside of taking magnesium, then maybe the placebo effect is just as important, but the science is not there to support magnesium for those issues.
Great, thank you. And a question from Kirsty Job. Is there any evidence that the earlier hours of the night are more worthwhile, so going to bed at 10 p.m. versus 12 a.m., or is it an individual depending on circadian body clock?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Quite a complicated answer. So it is individual. And as I tried to show, deeper sleep occurs more predominantly in the early part of the night. But if the early part of the night for your body clock starts at the early part of the sleep period is at midnight, then that's fine. And for others, it might be closer to 10 o'clock. So it is enormous individual variability, and it does depend on the internal timekeeping system. And some of us are early birds, need to go to bed early and get up early, and some of us are evening types that need to go to bed later and get up later. Doesn't always fit quite as well into our work patterns and schedules. But there's certainly this fallacy that sleep before midnight is more important than sleep after midnight, and that is not true. It relates to the timing of our clock and the structure of our sleep within our individual systems.
Great, thanks Leigh. Now tell us, where can we get hold of the book that Clare Ladyman and yourself have written?
So that is, if you go to Massey University Press website, it's available through there. It is also in most major bookshops, and or flick me an email and I'll find out for you.
Excellent. I'm sure we can do some Googling and find some links there. Well, it looks like we've finished all the questions and we'll start winding up so people can get back into their work for the day. So a huge thank you, Leigh. Really, really informative information there. I like the toolbox strategies that you've got for them to be able to take back when they're working with their mums and dads that need some extra sleep guidance with their pregnancy. Certainly is a stressful time. The body's going through many, many changes. So as much sleep as possible, worthy sleep, will certainly benefit everyone's mental health along the journey.
Thank you, and thanks so much for the opportunity to talk today. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I think it's a really important topic that we just need to keep talking about, and getting information out to women about the normal changes to sleep that occur during pregnancy.
Absolutely, great. Well, thanks everyone. Go well. We look forward to catching up with you at the next part of Pop-Up Chat.
Thank you.
Thanks.